Hey everybody, it's Chanchai again, and it's been a while since my last video, but this video is meant to be a Chanchai's Dojo, an extension of episode 2. So during episode 2 I talked about focus was pretty much the main focus of that topic, and I want to talk a bit more about things you can do to kind of improve how to improve your game more specifically, and being mindful of focus, but in the long-term goal of making sure that you build certain skills, certain techniques, and get them to the point where they use a lot less focus for you to do. So you can think of this as choosing things to train for to improve your efficiency in Virtua Fighter. And you can apply the same principle to other games or other tasks. It's really just about skill building. And so, kind of like Bruce Lee had taught, you're kind of learning skills, but we're going to talk about the low-hanging fruit of achievable skills. Things that you can kind of work on gradually over time in your game so that they become kind of a reflex action. So you're learning them, then you're going to unlearn them. And when you're learning it is when it does use focus, because you're making this conscious effort to apply a skill that you know that you're supposed to be doing in your games. It's not something that you always have to do, but you want to learn it so that it becomes easy to do, as easy as flipping a switch, as easy as some of the tasks in driving a car. And then you unlearn it so that, because once it's that easy, then you're going to have to learn how to just keep it at the ready without having to just always using it, because you want to end up making it an option, not a habit, and that's the unlearning process. So let's get back into what tasks can be done. How do we identify some of those things that we can work on? And we're going to use VF as our main context here. So I'm going to talk about in a VF way. Some of these skills might even be things that are harder to do in a Tekken, or they might be easier to do in a Tekken. It's really up to the game itself and how often the situations present itself. So let's give some example, and let's also talk about why certain things would be easier to work on and to build on. The most important thing is, if you can get a situation that happens more common than not, that's a lot easier to do, just simply because you're going to have the repetition, you're going to have the in-match experience to apply it. And so picking up things that happen more often in a match is much more important than picking up things that don't happen very often at all, even though you do eventually want to build those skills. So a good explanation for that is, when you watch a lot of the strong Virtua Fighter players in outside of Japan, in Japan, the players get to work on everything. They get the full experience of VF all the time. They get a heavy dose of Virtua Fighter. So they get to work even the niche situations more than a lot of us players in the West get to in terms of a real world environment. A lot of times we have to use the dojo to make up for that. But we're going to talk about things that actually happen in matches more. And outside of Japan, a lot of players, they have more trouble, let's say, punishing guaranteed on block. Why is that? And why is it that I'm not going to focus so much on what's guaranteed on block? It's pretty simple. When you play outside of Japan, especially with the mindset that a lot of Western players have, where they're afraid to do moves that are punishable on block, especially if they come from Tekken or they come from other fighters where that will kill you. But in Virtua Fighter, it doesn't seem to kill you. Why is that? Because it just doesn't happen much when players are not using those moves that much. And actually, technically, they should be using the moves more. I've mentioned it before, and I'll say it again. Technically, if your opponent doesn't punish something, the risk has been greatly reduced. And if the reward is high, you should be doing it until the risk actually matches that reward. So you should be doing punishable launchers until your opponent proves that they can punish it. But oftentimes outside of Japan, a lot of players do not do that. Like, they save that launcher for just very key moments. And that's not a bad thing. That's a very safe way to play. At the same time, that makes it a lower priority target for punishment. Instead of focusing completely on that, I'll just focus on what's more common. And that is actually the point of today. We should be focusing on situations that you are going to run into a lot and build the skills there. And then and on the side, yes, of course, build your guard punishment skill. That's a must. You should be doing that. But if your opponents aren't doing that much, you're putting a lot of effort into something they're not going to give to you. They're not going to give you that situation. But yes, in the long run, you should be punishing every guard punishable thing. But it's pretty obvious if you watch me play, even when I'm beating strong players, even when I'm doing really well, win a tournament, you'll see that I am actually really bad at punishing those situations because they just rarely happen, and I only end up punishing them against the opponents that are going to keep doing it until I actually punish it. And that's because in VF you can still win in other ways. And so what matters is I do better with the safe situations. I am handling the basic jab, elbows, throws, and real simple situations a lot more, and I'm winning a lot on that. And then I'm also capitalizing on ring outs because I've always been presented with the situation to ring out my opponents because my character's good at that. Okay, so anyways, the summary of what I just said was basically, in Virtua Fighter, guard punishment is really good. It is a skill you should have. However, it is not the focus of this video, except to say that it is a lower priority in Virtua Fighter than it is in, say, Tekken, because in Tekken, you can't, you're gonna get that situation. You're gonna get the certain whiff punish. You're gonna set up for it, so you need to be strong at that. And you also need to be on top of it because your opponent's gonna be on top of it. And in that game, maybe they're gonna use those punishable moves more. But in Virtua Fighter, in Japan, they'll use those punishable moves more, but for some reason, a lot of players outside of Japan are afraid to do that. And so you just don't get a lot of looks at it. This is why some players like Juicebox, when he first started playing VF, would get upset because it would be like 5 rounds between one knee and the next because the opponent just wasn't doing it much. And he even got mad and be like, why is nobody trying to launch me? And he thought like they were holding back. They're kind of holding back because the logic is they didn't want to get punished for doing that move. But also they just picked it at such a slow rate that it worked better. That you just suddenly, it was off your mind because VF gives you a lot more things. And that's the other part. Out in the West, we're going to spam a lot of different safe things, and then we're going to do like the launcher. And that makes that, like, if you're putting all your focus into punishing the launcher, it really takes away from your ability to deal with a lot of other things for something that might not come as often, and for things that you're going to be able to punish way less than. Like, just, if you're only punishing a knee once every 5 rounds because that's the rate of the knee, but you're not doing things right on the other parts, like Nitaku happens all the freaking time. But the guard punish is like, you get very few looks at it. So that's why in Virtua Fighter, it's not like the end-all be-all when you're developing your game, when you're trying to become stronger. That's why I'm not horribly punished for not punishing. I am still winning a lot because I'm doing the things that are much more common a lot. I'm using ECD in situations where it's really good to use a lot, and that opportunity happens a lot more. I know how to use the jab a lot better than a lot of my opponents. I know how to use the elbow a lot better than a lot of my opponents. And Leon actually has one of the weaker elbows in this game because his elbow on counter hit does not force Nitaku, But on counter hit, he does get a follow-up P. But that thing is not hit confirmable. You have to predict that. You have to predict whether you're going to get that counter hit or not to be able to do the elbow punch. So it's a much harder to use elbow than everybody else's elbow, actually, right? But my elbow frustrates a lot of people. So, okay, let's get to the point now. So, what are good things to work on? What is the low-hanging fruit that's going to really help you? Well, first off, if you do situations that you create, that's a lot easier to force it in and to work on it it does put you at more risk because you're overusing a move or you're overusing the setup. But those are typically easier for you to develop a skill around. So let's say fuzzy guard. Fuzzy guard is something that you can do easily by doing a crouch dash whenever you're at -5. You do a crouch dash, hold the diagonal down forward when you do the crouch dash, and then as soon as you see your character duck, you go back to neutral and you hold guard. That's all. That's a fuzzy guard. It can be done at -5. What is the most common situation I would tell you to do a fuzzy guard? I would say get good at doing it by doing an elbow, single elbow, 6B and guard canceled. And then when it's blocked, do the fuzzy guard. Why? You created that situation. Your action created that situation. You weren't having to think so hard about what move your opponent did that put you at -5. Instead, it's the move you did, and the consequence was that your opponent happened to block it. You recognized that they were going to block it, and I can tell you how to better recognize that even before it happens, but that's a subject for another time. But you do like an elbow. You knew that you're doing the elbow, and you also know that you see that your opponent's going to block it, so then you start preparing for the fuzzy guard. If you see that your opponent is like going to get hit by it or they're crouching, then there's other actions you do there, and you want to train that too. But in general, though, at the very least, you can always fuzzy guard after it anyways, but you should definitely train yourself. The hard part, the focus, is going to be used on identifying when your opponent's going to block the elbow. And then you go, I'm going to do the crouch dash, and I'm going to guard, and then I'm going to do neutral guard. That's how you train fuzzy guard. The basic situation is whenever your elbow gets blocked. And elbow is such a safe move with such little consequence that you're always going to be able to do something good with it. And even if you accidentally did a fuzzy guard when your opponent got hit by the elbow, that's not bad. Still a very good thing. You still get a lot of options there. Suddenly, if you do an attack, you've got the delay attack. You know? So there is like almost no consequence for working on that. So the safety of this technique, do a fuzzy guard after elbow. The fact that you're doing the elbow makes it a lot easier. It gives you so much, all the opportunity you want to put this into practice, to train it, to build it into a reflex, and build it into where, okay, I did a normal hit elbow, or I saw that it's going to be a normal hit. That's only 0 frames, so I'm going to low punch right away. That's the actual flowchart is. If your elbow just does normal hit, try to low punch. If your elbow is guarded, fuzzy guard. If you accidentally fuzzy guarded when it hits, that's okay. You're still in a good shape, and you're actually in a really cool position with cool options. If you counter hit, you're usually, with Leon it's +4, a lot of characters it's like +6 or +7, and so I think it's +7, but +6, let's say +6. So a lot of times you're going to want to do like a 17 frame mid, if that's the case, right? 17 frame mid or throw, right? You've got Nitaku. If they're crouched, then you definitely have Nitaku. So you force Nitaku by doing a 17 frame mid or a throw. This sounds like a lot. Elbow is quite intense, but using your focus to train yourself on mastering what to do with an elbow after it's been blocked, when it's been evaded, when it's been guarded, when it's whiffs, when it hits, when it counter hits, when it crouch hits. It sounds like a lot. It's actually pretty simple, and you can keep it down to just, I'm going to either low punch or I'm going to fuzzy guard. That actually will be a fine flow chart if that's what you want to do, until you get used to it. But if you ever get the counter hit and you do Nitaku, you're in fantastic shape, because Nitaku is a situation you should work on. So, elbow flowchart's what I just mentioned, but specifically work on elbow fuzzy guard. Keep it simple, master that, and then and master low jab if it's a normal hit. Okay. Another simple thing is, let's do basic Nitaku setups. When your high jab counter hits your opponent, that's punch and guard cancel, you have Nitaku. Chances with a high jab especially, you know that if it counter hits, absolutely you are in big Nitaku. You get to do against most characters a 20 frame mid, but let's say 19 frame mid. You get to mix up between a 19 frame mid and a throw. And that's because if you actually hit your opponent with a high jab, you counter hit them, guaranteed they're standing. They're not crouching because it's a high attack. So if you get good at doing a high jab counter hit into Nitaku, specifically, something as much as a 19 frame mid versus a throw, it's another great situation to master. And later on, you're going to be, whenever I'm up close and I'm +8, I can do the same exact thing that I did whenever I counter hit with a jab. This is a very transferable skill. It is one of the low-hanging fruits of VF. Get good at that, and you are strong as hell. And it is a situation that happens way more than your opponent doing a knee and you blocking it. Happens way more than that. In fact, many times they try to do the knee and you did the high jab and you counter hit them. Boom. So that's the situation we're working on. Mix up between a powerful mid and a throw. Okay? So Nitaku is the situation I really recommend getting good at. Fuzzy guard also. And fuzzy guard is transferable too, because later on you realize, hey, I'm at -5, I'm at -4. When this thing happens, this annoying situation that repeats itself, I can fuzzy guard. And you'll start adding to that. And fuzzy guard becomes this skill that requires less focus. It is a high level technique and yet requires very little focus when you start applying it and reapplying it and learning all the different places over time where to apply it. Nitaku is the same thing. This game did a final showdown, Ultimate Showdown, did a wonderful job of sorry, something crazy happened in the parking lot. Did a wonderful job of giving you this high-level technique that's so powerful in the game. It even is something we measure strong players on. That player is really good at fuzzy guard. They're hell to deal with. Killa is a hard player to fight. Why? Because they're so good at fuzzy guard. Fudo, so hard to fight. A million things, but fuzzy guard's one of them. Himajan, also really good fuzzy guard. So fuzzy guard's one of those skills that you should be learning. And just because you master it on the elbow doesn't mean you're still going to have to use your focus to add it to where you use it in other situations. But it just becomes easier each time. With each situation you learn and go, I can use a fuzzy guard there, you become a master of the fuzzy guard itself, not a master of every situation, but you start thinking in terms of, oh, I can do it there. And then you can work on the harder thing. The harder situation is the situation your opponent imposes on you. There are situations when your opponent hits you and you're at -5. Well, you can fuzzy guard there, but that's really hard to do, at least at first. But over time, as you get better at fuzzy guard in general, you start being able to do it in those situations. Partly because after a while, the key component for learning situations your opponent imposes on you is being able to be calm, comfortable in the way that you normally play. So you need to get to a level of comfort in your play to where you're pretty relaxed and able to accept what your opponent is doing. And then when you get to that point with an opponent, then you are able to start seeing when they do that technique that's going to put you at -5. And it's not that you're trying to force yourself to get hit. It's just that you kind of realize, the consequence is not so bad. If that's the option he's picking and he hits me, normal hit jab, I can fuzzy guard. And so you start at normal hit low punch, I can fuzzy guard. So then you start realizing that when your opponent hits you, as long as it's not a counter hit, if it's a recovery hit, they interrupted the string, but the hit happened after your hit frame of your string, that's going to be a recovery hit. And there's no red spark, it's just normal yellow. Then you're like, yellow, I can fuzzy guard. So I do this string that was kind of unsafe because my opponent likes to low punch it. But actually, when they low punch this string, it's not so bad because I'm going to be able to fuzzy guard after that. That's a hard thing to get good at, but over time, with that mindset, that comfort in the player, that anticipation of that option, that consequence happening, now you have a countermeasure. And so that is how you get good. add a technique like being able to fuzzy guard from when you get hit. Now, if you're trying to wait all day for that exact situation to occur and it's not happening, that's frustrating. That is a focus drain on you. That's really hard. So that becomes a little trickier on working, and that's why it's a later priority. Learning the situations when your opponent forces you into a fuzzy guard possible situation is harder than learning fuzzy guard in the situations you create. And so, like I said, situations you create, I did my elbow and they blocked it, I can fuzzy guard. Situations I create, Nitaku. I counter hit with my high jab, I got big Nitaku. I counter hit with my low jab, I've got small Nitaku. Small Nitaku just means that you should be using something like... Small Nitaku means, it's like +6, right? 6 plus 11, assuming you're fighting an 11 frame jabber, is 17. So it means you got to do a 17 frame mid or faster, and then mix that up with a throw. So whenever I counter hit with my low jab, 17 frame mid or throw. I counter hit with my high jab, 19 frame mid or faster versus the throw. That's the Nitaku to learn, and that's not the end of Nitaku, that's the beginning of Nitaku. Nitaku is a very, very interesting situation in Virtua Fighter, but your first goal, one of the things that you can spend your early efforts on mastering, is just identifying when it happens and that you have options to doing it. And then after you get comfortable with those options, after you're comfortable with Nitaku, then you can start expanding on Nitaku. You can start going, oh, I have these other options, and my opponent, has very specific things that they do, and while the standard answers are awesome in Nitaku, I have an even better answer for exactly what they're doing. That's the joy of Virtua Fighter that happens later. But first we got to get to Nitaku. And so the simple message today is the low-hanging fruit, you're going to run into Nitaku situations way more than you run into guard punish. Way more. Guard punish, you're looking for one fish in a whole pond. Nitaku, you're looking for fish of a certain size. Any fish of a certain size in a whole pond. Or a range of sizes. You're like, I'm looking for the big fish. I'm looking for the medium fish. That's Nitaku, right? Fuzzy guard, I'm looking for the exact medium fish. Okay? Or better. But when you're, trying to look for guard punishable situations and then beating yourself up over it is really hard because your opponent just doesn't do it nearly that much in Virtua Fighter. Unless you fight Japanese players, then they just do it until you punish. But that's awesome because then you get to train them, and then you're like, hey, new focus today. I'm going to work on punishing that move because they keep using it. And I do like that about fighting Japanese players. But when you're fighting Western players, they're so afraid of you punishing it, they just don't use it much. And so their whole game is like, I'm going to choose my moment to use it. And that's perfectly valid, perfectly fine, but also why it's better to focus on the Nitaku situation. It's better to focus on the small advantage situation in Virtua Fighter. I don't have time to talk about that now, but I will say the small advantage and the small disadvantage is wonderful. That is a more complicated thing, though. That's so many options. In Virtua Fighter, the player on defense has the most options. Defense meaning that they're at a disadvantage. They have the most options when at small disadvantage and they're up close. The player on offense always has a lot of options up close. Both players in Virtua Fighter have a ton of good options up close. They have their best options up close. Virtua Fighter, this game, Final Showdown, Ultimate Showdown, is a game where you need to be fighting up close a lot with a very active mind. That said, the needle through the thread, the silver bullet is the Nitaku. If you get good at Nitaku, a lot of the game opens up, and you actually can just beat even players that are stronger than you if you're good at Nitaku. But there is more beyond that, and you'll learn more techniques on how to beat them. But it's just much more possible to beat them if you have an understanding of the Nitaku situation. You can identify them, and that is the low-hanging fruit in this game, is identifying those situations. Get good at that. Get good at just a simple mid-throw mix-up. It doesn't even matter. It could be a bad mid. It's still, as long as you're mixing it up, you're doing pretty good, and then you can always upgrade that. So the low-hanging fruit, the easy way to reduce the focus cost in your VF, learning Nitaku, and the easiest ones are the ones that you create. So, and the basic is interrupting with a high jab, interrupt with a low jab. Okay, interrupt with an elbow also is a small Nitaku situation. Those are 3 Nitaku situations I just gave that are things that you can do a million times in a day. Okay. Fuzzy guard. When your elbow is blocked, do fuzzy guard. When your low punch is blocked, even though it's not necessary, still good, do a fuzzy guard. Those 2 situations, very easy to work on, very good to master it, and then later you'll start to be able to apply the fuzzy guard in many other situations. So I hope that helps you all today. I know it's very basic, but I hope I was able to repeat it enough and help you understand the mindset and why it's good, why this is the low-hanging fruit to get to being a lot better very quickly in this game, and why it matters in Virtua Fighter. Also, why guard punishment matters less, even though it really matters too. Alright, have a good one. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to making another video soon.